Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Terrain365 Invictus AT. First off, though, I want to thank my Patreon patrons, now more than ever, for a bunch of reasons, not the little of which, that I could just see this guy in a store go, oh, I wanted one of these guys, after actually my buddy Ryan tipped me off, like, oh, I want one of these guys, and then boom, the credit card's in there, boom, it's on the way. I don't have to think about it, I don't have to agonize, I don't have to sell a bunch of stuff. Their support makes this channel possible, and it makes it possible for you to pick up things like this, and especially things like this that require a lot of time to carry it, right? I wanted to give this material a lot of time in the pocket so I could say intelligent things. Patreon patrons make it possible. Thank you very much. Okay, size comparison, next thing. First off, let's go on ahead and put it against the standards here, the Spyderco Delica, the Spyderco PM2. And so what we see here is that this is actually on the larger end of things. In terms of sharpened blade length, we are right in the same vicinity as the PM2 here, although the handle is actually maybe a little, it's different, but it's about PM2 sized. And then here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2 here. And then actually I want to put it up against one other knife that I feel like is actually quite comparable in a number of ways, but very different, and that would be the Quiet Carry Waypoint here. So anyways, there is that size comparison there for you. Next thing, many of you are probably looking at this and going, wait a second, I've seen that before. This is actually a very old design. I say that not as a demerit in any way, shape, or form. This kind of thing has been around for a while. It's Patrick Ma and Michael Vagnino were the folks who did this. So you've seen variants of this design from TAD. The Dauntless was a thing that looked a lot like this. PDW, Prometheus Design Work, is also Patrick Ma, or at least he is one of the people involved there. This design has been around, and so if this feels familiar, that's because it is. But it's done so by the same people over and over again. So there is that. But this is from a relatively newer company called Terrain365. That is their little logo right there. And their whole shtick actually is this blade material. And this blade material is not steel at all. This is what they are referring to as Terravantium. That's right. Terravantium is actually a Dendritic Cobalt. It's not steel at all. It's not magnetic. Here, I've got a big old thing of magnets here. What we're going to see here is nothing I can touch on this knife is in any way, shape, or form magnetic, whereas pretty much any other knife, oh yeah. So this is very, very much a non-magnetic knife, a non-rusting thing. The Cobalt is definitely the news here. And this is actually a relatively expensive knife, just to get that out there. This is looking at $380 as configured right here, and $400 for a full tie, and they've got some other models as well. But anyways, that's who this is, Terrain365, the Terravantium folks, but it's an older design, and so yeah, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this interesting knife. On the good side, to start with, it is very nice to see a thumb stud knife with bearings these days. It feels like flippers are mandatory lately, and they're really not. Seriously, it's less and less so. I think flippers are going out of style, but it is good to see this, right? Not everything needs a flipper tab, and a very nice action on a thumb stud is absolutely a beautiful thing. And this knife carries very well, and it carries very stealthily in the pocket here. It's not canted back particularly, but it still works quite well. It just ends up being roughly you just slip it in the corner of your pocket, right? It carries beautifully. So I think that's very nice, and I like seeing that. And speaking of which, the action on this guy is quite nice as well, with a very nice fall shut sort of action on the bearings here. And that makes sense with a relatively heavy and thick blade, but still. Action on this is very good, and it's very straightforward to get this guy open without any wrist or anything like that. Next thing, this guy is non-magnetic and rust-proof. This is sort of the biggest thing, but the entire knife is non-magnetic. The entire knife is rust-proof. And that's great. That's going to be useful for a number of people, and it's also oxidizing-proof. It's a very environmentally durable knife, and so that's good. Next thing, this is using a full backspacer. What I mean by that is this entire area is filled in. This is not something that you see that often anymore. Lately, we are in a world of partial backspaces like this, or standoffs like, oh, come here, standoff knife. I've got something with standoffs around here. Here we go, the PM2, which just has this little, we're usually doing that. This has a full long backspacer, and honestly, that feels a little luxurious. At some level, it makes sense, right? Because the blade on this guy, I get the impression that the Cobalt's a little heavier than you'd expect, and so as a result, they need a little bit of extra weight there. But I very much like that. I think it's classy, I think it's nice, and it keeps the cutting edge, very safely concealed from anything inside your pocket. That's just great. I am here for it. Next thing on this guy, this gives you a lot of choices, right? In this model alone, you can get titanium and G10 as well as carbon fiber on the handle there, and a bunch of different colors of G10, which is good. Gives you some choices if you can find them. There is also now a compact version that actually came out after I ordered this guy, which frankly I might like a little bit more given my bias here, because this is not a tiny knife. We are looking here, if I measure it out, just about 3.5 inches. Maybe the cop could measure this more than 3.5 if they really don't like you, but nonetheless, it's about 3.5 inches, whatever. But you got a lot of different options, as well as a couple of other choices of similar-looking knives from the 365 folks. There's that. Next thing, this guy has a very nice design. Like I said, you've seen this before. Likely, I've reviewed this before as the Tad Dauntless, but honestly, this is... I feel like this might be a little bit better made, and certainly the Terravantium makes it a lot more interesting. Having that on there, that's nice. And then actually, it's got some very nice details to it. It's a good design for a couple of reasons. One thing, if you look at the thumb stud here, it looks like plastic. Well, and in fact it is, but I'm going to charge that plastic off camera with a powerful flashlight. This knife has lube. Is this necessary? No. In absolutely no way is that necessary. Is it cool? Yes, it is, 100%. It's also got very nice milling on the G10 here, and honestly, the G10 looks pretty spectacular, given that it's got, you know, this whole thing is contoured. You see the lines in the G10 kind of emerging naturally. I really like the G10 on this, and this gray G10, this is what they're calling gray. It's kind of got a bluish undertone to it in person. But nonetheless, especially, this is the same material. It's kind of a grayish blue. I like it a lot. You've got the hidden clip screw. You can see here that the clip, the screw is coming in through the bottom there. And so the top of it is very clean looking here. We've got ourselves the etching on this guy is very nice, as frankly is the typography on Terravantium. It's kind of cool looking. The jimping on it is quite good, with some jimping up here, jimping here. No argument there. And, you know, honestly, one of the little details that I really liked a lot is check this area out right in there. They've got this little amphitheater cut out for the, that's probably not the term for it, but whatever, to allow your finger to get in there and touch the lock bar with some traction, which is going to make this guy a little bit more straightforward to open and close, well, to close more specifically, with wet hands or in a marine environment sort of thing. And then finally on the good side, this guy has very nice ergonomics. This fits well in the hand, and what they've done here is not only is the clip is relatively smooth and relatively wide, but it's contoured. The clip itself has a bit of a, let's see if I can show this to you. The clip itself actually has a little bit of a radius to the top of it. As a result, when this guy is in the hand, it sits very well. There's no real hot spots on this guy, and especially when you choke up with his finger choil, you've got the jimping pad here, as well as this area here on the, this locks right on into your hand. I really do like the ergonomics on this knife. It's quite good in that way. So to me, at least, that's what's good here, is you've got great ergonomics, some nice details, nice design, nice action, good choices, full back spacer, knife is non-magnetic and rust-proof, and it's nice to see a thumb stud on a bearings knife. On the great side to me is the Terravantium material itself. This Dendritic Cobalt blade is interesting. It is weird. It is very, very weird. This is not a knife that is, like, look, I think we'll all agree that at this point I've looked at a lot of knives. I've probably used more knives than any sane human ever should in their entire lifetime. Maybe. Anyways, I digress. This is unusual. This is very unusual. Because the thing is, this is a knife that feels dull very quickly. Like I sharpen it or strop it up into a really nice hair-popping edge, and then I use it on a cardboard box, and it feels dull. But the problem is, it cuts still. It's actually still quite sharp. Like, what it does is it loses that super acute, like, hair-popping edge very quickly. But then, for some reason, it still keeps cutting. It still keeps you, like, if you put this through cardboard, it still keeps grabbing, biting through. It holds a good working edge, actually, for a while. It's a weird edge. It's a toothy edge. It's not like a smooth, slicey, whittling little, what's the term for that? The bushcraft thing that everybody shows off, feather sticks, right? It's not going to be doing that. It's not going to be separating, paper towels at an atomic level. But at the same time, it still cuts. So this is very, very interesting. It kind of sets up a contrast between the idea of edge retention, which is what we often talk about in the knife world, and we often talk about it in terms of retaining that hair-popping edge versus like long-term cutting power. This is not particularly good at retaining that super fine edge, but very, very good. I would say it's certainly on par, we'll put it that way, at retaining good durable cutting power. In practice, it's good to go for everyday cutting tasks, right? With the proviso that you're not looking to shave with this guy every day after you get through a pile of cardboard, it seems to work pretty well. It's not the same kind of holds an acute, hard edge forever that you get with like Maximum or S110V, and my understanding is that it can be a little bit softer and tend to roll if you're really beating on it, but the thing is, it's good to go. This is a blade steel that is absolutely usable in a daily carry kind of knife. I have no problem calling this all set, good to go. But the important part about it is not that. I mean, this is not like the, oh my God, edge retention performer in the world. I want to be very, very clear about that. You've got all kinds of options out there, but what this does have is some other interesting things. Namely, it's completely rust-proof. And this is not like, okay, Vanax, for instance, is a rust-proof steel by and large, but there are ways in theory it could oxidize. This won't. This just isn't steel, right? It doesn't know it. It doesn't oxidize. It doesn't stain. It's just like it's good to go, right? It's also non-magnetic and non-ferrous, right? This makes this a very unique knife, and it probably makes it a very interesting knife to somebody with very unique requirements. So it is a very different kind of material, but it is still good to go for everyday carry. And to me, that's what's great. It's different. It's not something that I've seen a million of in the last week or so, right? So to me, at least, that's what's great, the Terravantium. On the bad side, I started off by going, oh my God, they don't have a lock bar insert for the steel type. Oh, that's right, it's not steel. And so, you know what, I'm just going to assume they don't need one because it ain't steel. But this is the kind of thing that my life has been full of as I've been carrying this knife for a while. It's just like, oh, that's right, it's not steel. Nick, you're an idiot. Try again. So, you may be seeing things like, oh, there's no lock bar insert on here. But the thing is, reevaluate your assumptions. We are doing things a little differently here. Next thing on this guy, it is a little on the heavier side. Grab my scale right quick. This guy, I kind of get the feeling like the Cobalt is actually a little bit heavier than steel. We're at 4.12 ounces here for about 3.5 inches worth of blade. That's a little bit heavier than you might expect relative to some of your modern ultralight sort of things. Not the end of the world. And the balance is good, by the way. The balance is right about where you would want it to be. And partly, I suspect, due to this full back spacer here, but also partly just, it's well balanced, but it's a little bit on the heavier side. Not the end of the world. Next thing, as I already said, this is not going to keep an, oh my God, super hair-popping scalpel edge sort of thing. That's just not the situation here. I kind of wish I knew more about metallurgy so I could talk more in detail about why this is going on. But nonetheless, my impression of it is it doesn't keep that kind of knife person sharpness, right? The kind that you shave some arm hair or something like that. Like, that's not what this is doing, but it cuts, and it cuts, and it cuts pretty surprisingly well. Next thing, availability on these guys is a little bit batchy. What I mean by that is that they're not always in stock. A bunch of retailers seem to be carrying them. I got mine through, who did I do? PVK in Vegas. Nice retailer. Anyways, but they're available other places. But the problem is they're not regularly available, right? You can't just go to their website and place an order. You have to wait, and then it's kind of opaque when new ones show up. Whatever. So, in terms of just buying one, maybe a little harder than I'd like it to be. Next thing, these are pricey. This guy right here in the G10, $380 for a full titanium variant, which I think I handled at G10. Not the material, but the show at the USN Gathering in 2019. Back in the day when gatherings were a thing. Anyways, I digress. But nonetheless, you can get a full tie version for $400. That's a little pricey, right? The material here is unique, and in fact, there are only a couple of other makers who've used it in small batches. I think David Boye, I'm not quite sure how his name's pronounced. A couple of other folks out there have used it, but it's a very small batch sort of thing. And so it's not like there were a lot of comparables, right? I'm not saying, well, everybody else using Terravantium is like, no, it's pricey. But the thing is, this is pretty expensive. And it's about $100 more than some comparable knives you get in things like Vanax, and it's certainly more than things you can find in LC200N and whatnot, or tungsten carbide even, right? This is a relatively pricey choice if all you're looking for is the stainlessness, or frankly, a pocket knife generally. And finally, on the bad side, the detent on this guy is a little bit on the harder side. Now, look, to be fair, it is very much locked in there. There is nothing I'm doing to get this guy coming out of there artificially. And it does mean that this has a very reliable opening to it, but it is also a little bit harder than I might like. I might like that detent to be dialed back by maybe 10%, and I think it would just be a little bit nicer in experience, right? Not the end of the world, but it's definitely, I would say that's the biggest weakness of this particular pocket knife. It's just the detent is a little bit on the harder side. Maybe the price could be a bigger weakness. Anyways, so to me at least that's what's bad here, is that the detent is a little bit hard. It is pricey. Availability is batchy. You're not going to keep a scalpel ale. Where did that even come from? Anyways, look, talking really hard, right? Scalpel edge. It's a little on the heavier side, and there's no lock bar insert, but it doesn't need one because it's not steel, so don't get bent out of shape there. On the ugly front, there's honestly nothing particularly ugly here, so let's go to the conclusion, which is that this is weird, but this is kind of nice, right? It's got a nice silhouette. I think this works very well in the pocket, making it very carryable, no flipper tab, that kind of thing. It's fully non-magnetic, fully rust-proof, with a full backspace, a couple of nice choices that you've got in terms of other options from the company, both for this model and otherwise. It's got a nice action, nice design, nice details, great ergos, and a unique blade material. It is a little on the heavier side. The edge is not going to remain stupid sharp for very long. The availability is kind of on and off. It's pricey, and the detent is a little bit hard. Honestly, this is a knife that I feel like, look, there are knives that are just like, you should buy this. Like, period, everybody go. Your life will be better in terms of knifery if you pick this thing up. That's not what this is. This is an options knife. It's not for everybody, but it is for somebody, right? There has got to be somebody out there with a super specialized existence. Like, they do some job that I have never even heard of, but they need an entirely non-magnetic knife. Maybe you are an MRI technician and in strong magnetic fields regularly. This could be a really excellent pocket knife for you, right? Because it's completely non-magnetic. Or maybe you deal with heavy oxidizers all day long and you want to use your pocket knife at work. I don't know. Or maybe somebody just looks at this and goes like, oh my God, they finally did it. This is perfect. Or maybe you're just a knife geek and you see something that's like, that's a material I've never heard of. I want one of those. Don't know anyone like that. But anyways, either way, this is a knife that's going to be a great option for a bunch of people. Mind you, there are a lot of options, particularly at the $380 price point. There are some other things that are out there, right? If you're just looking for rust-proof, there is now no shortage of LC200N knives. This right here is the Spyderco Pacific Salt 2, which is in LC200N, is, I think, just north of $100 these days. Maybe a little higher than that. So this is a rust-proof steel for all purposes, basically, right? And Vanax is another option here. This is the Quiet Carry Waypoint, which is another knife made, well, this is a knife made out of Vanax. It actually feels very comparable in a lot of ways to this guy. This guy is bigger, but this guy, they both have sort of the same stated idea of let's make something that doesn't rust. This is magnetic, though, so you want to keep that in mind, but this is about $300, right? And, you know, I would argue that Vanax, as well as the LC200N, hold a shaving edge longer than this, even though I think in terms of sharp working edge, these two might be about equal. Well, I think Vanax still wins a little bit. Look, I haven't done discrete scientific testing. What you are hearing is opinions of jackasses using pocket knives. It's about all you're getting here. But anyways, both of those kind of materials, LC200N and Vanax, can be had substantially cheaper, and they are, well, just as good, if not a little bit better, depending on your needs there. I can totally see back in the day when H1 steel was the only other variant for completely rust-proof, and H1 steel is bad. In my estimation, it's just like, oh, no. It has no edge retention. I would pay, this is so much better than H1, I can't even begin to tell you about it. But now that we've got things like LC200N and Vanax, it just doesn't have quite the same, like, oh my God, I need that, right? And at the end of the day, if you don't need the weird features, if you don't need the rust-proofness, you don't need the magneticness, you don't need, then honestly, this isn't really that much of a special knife. You can get a bunch of things, still a good design, but you can get a bunch of other things like that. The environmental durability stuff is really the main point of sale here. And there are other options, by the way. This is one item from the company. I have a review coming up on this little guy right here. This is the Terrain365 Otter. Same Terravantium material here, but in a very, very different form factor. Wow. I should stop talking. Form factor here, and so you might find that interesting. They've got a bunch of other options out there too. But nonetheless, this is an interesting knife, and it is an option knife. But ultimately, I think this review, and ultimately your buying decision, will come down exactly to one question. The thing that will answer this more than ever, and let you know whether this is the perfect knife for you. Well, you just need to ask yourself, do you find the Terravantium to be Terradvantageous? Okay, anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, and I haven't gotten too rusty in reviewing, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.